What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ask A CISSP. So this is a companion podcast to the Other Side of the Firewall podcast, where we talk to those movers, shakers, and glass cylinder breakers, those people of color who've made it to the other side of the proverbial firewall. With Ask A CISSP, what I like to do is I like to interview somebody who is in the industry or someone who is looking to join the industry, or it's just a different vibe, right? It's a conversation to get to know somebody, and then also to introduce them to the audience. So I have the pleasure of having a special guest on for this week. So it's been a while. I think it's been like 2 or 3 weeks since I've had a guest on. So I'd like for you to introduce yourself, give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll jump right into your cybersecurity origin story.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for having me on the show today, Ryan. Really appreciate it. My name's Kayne McGladrey. I am the field CISO for Hyperproof, and I am also a senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, that's the IEEE, for contributions to cybersecurity. I like to say that I've been doing this for over 25 years because that makes me sound younger than I possibly am. It's kind of one of those things. What else can I say about myself? I am a multiple-time CISO. Most recent time was with the Defense Industrial Base, which is a whole side story there. And I'm based out of Bellingham, Washington, up in the far Pacific Northwest, where we have more breweries than we have grocery stores.
Okay, that I did not know. That's an interesting fact, actually. And so that kind of gives me a good pivot. So I think you left out, you're being humble, right? You left some stuff out. So in addition to all of what you just said, you have a really good podcast that I actually listen to. And people know I don't like to necessarily get a lot of material from somebody before I talk to them, right? I like for it to be like brand new, just like I'm an audience member. But I really do like the one segment that you have. It's drafting compliance, I believe.
Oh, yes. Yep. I've had to tell my friends that I drink beer at work, and they ask me what's so bad about that, and I have to remind them I'm not a beer drinker. Before the show, actually, I was out shopping at my local beer store, where I had a picture of another CISO's refrigerator. And I was like showing them, like, so here's the beer, like, which of these do you have? And that tends to be the show production process, which is a weird way to produce a podcast. Like, show up at a store and be like, here's a picture of somebody's beer selection. Tell me what you have. But it's a fun show. We're now getting into episode 20, and it's about FedRAMP. So if you want to learn about why you probably don't want to do FedRAMP, or why you'd like more gray hair in your life, it's good in both ways.
So yeah, I'll definitely be tuning in for that one. Like, because people know my background, military, right? So retired military, 20 years Air Force, FedRAMP and CMMC, all that good stuff was, and it was there, and then it wasn't there, and then it was being built, and then it was being, refreshed. So now we've come to a place where it's like, hey, it's time. It is go time. So podcasts like yours and just be able to provide that information, especially like I like your guys' format, right? Like, so we're pretty short as well, 15 minutes or less. Then we have some side tangents, things of that nature. But I think like I'm inspired by your timing and the theme of the show. So I think it really works out really well. It's entertaining and keeps people engaged. So I definitely want you to plug all your things on the podcast as well, right? Like, make sure.
Well, I also think that cybersecurity really does need to be more accessible for people, wherever they are on the spectrum of career or engagement with cybersecurity, because for too many years we've had this perception, often driven by a media narrative, that cybersecurity is the domain of cis white men in hoodies. And I finally, at least figured down why hoodies. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she explained to me, the reason she wears a hoodie to work at her office is it's so cold in there. And it's like, okay, finally I get the hoodie thing. I don't own a hoodie, but I can totally get the vibe. But there's been that continuous media narrative that this industry is very hands-on keyboard. It's very technical. It's very, it takes a high degree of education to attain those roles. And then you look at, we've been doing this I've been at this for 25 years. You look at the resulting gap in terms of diversity, in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds of individuals. And I can't help but feel we've been doing something wrong, because if we weren't doing what we've been doing and communicating in our ways that we have been, we probably wouldn't find ourselves in the current state we're in.
Right. No, absolutely. And again, I'm glad that you decided to reach out to be on the show. Because you just gave me a practical reason for the hoodies, which I did not think about. Like I've worked help desk, right, within a focal point, like so it's freezing in there.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
not everywhere though. That would make sense, right? As opposed to the like you said, the cis white male in a hoodie in his basement, for some reason he's in the dark while he's
Yeah.
doing his nefarious things in cyber. So now, okay, got you. Hoodies because it's cold, and I accept it.
I
I'll
mean,
allow
it makes more sense than anything else, honestly. Then I just wish that the way I also look at it is if we could just catch that one guy. Obviously, cybersecurity's fixed, right?
it. It is very true. It is always the same moniker. So a little housekeeping. So I want to make sure everybody understands. So uh, you reached out to be on the podcast. I overwhelmingly accepted. It took a while for us to get here. Just I wanted to make sure that I was not doing anything that would, put my employer in a bad space or put you in a bad space because you guys have a partnership. It has nothing to do with me, right? So podcast is independent. We're not doing any marketing deals. You're not paying me to be on here. I really do like your product, and I do want to get into that as well. But it's all free. It's just you paying with your time and me here to listen to fanboy out about it, right? So
It's mutual
uh,
in that case, which is fantastic
I
because I
appreciate
love
that.
what you're doing, and I do think as I said at the top, we need more diverse voices as part of our conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, the numbers are still pretty staggering, right? When I started the podcast almost 3 years ago, where 7% were people of color, maybe I want to say it was less than 20% were women in cybersecurity, and both have grown, but not to the extent that we would like, right? And we just talked about stats in Canada last week, where they're having an issue with first getting women into cybersecurity and then retaining them, right? And we're just talking
Mhm.
about how when you think Canada, you think like America's cousin, right? Like it's like America, but the diet is better, right? Like they vacation for longer, but now they have the same issues that we have, right? So it's really
Mhm.
interesting to see that. But no, I'm glad that you're on. So two things I have to ask. Number one, we're gonna go into your cybersecurity origin story, but number two, I see various variations of CISO. So if you can break down field CISO for me in the audience.
Oh, sure. So we'll start with the easy question, the field CISO bit. So it's the way we've structured it, I am functionally a CISO, but I'm primarily outward facing. You've seen Tom on drafting compliance. He does a lot of the heavy lift policy, internal governance work. And then we have a third individual who's actually responsible for implementation. And that's really modeled on something we saw a few years back, actually, with a fintech down in Atlanta, where as they described it, they had the person who they could put in front of the board, who they could put in front of the media, who they could put in front of customer or prospect, whatever. Somebody who was very focused and policy oriented, and somebody who was very technically oriented as well.
Okay.
In terms of other disambiguation, we've seen the title of deputy CISO because there's this recognition finally in business, and I do hope, especially in light of the most recent SEC guidance, as well as what New York State's doing with Section 500, the Second Amendment that they're putting in. There's more of a recognition that no CISO can do everything. Like I've seen CISO job listings that
Right.
say you have to be able to write Python code and you have to be able to do incident response and you have to be able to report to the board and manage a multi-million-dollar budget. And you go, there's no single person that does that. And so the intent of the field CISO is really to have that outward facing view on the world, that engagement with the world, but also in correlation and in partnership with those other individuals in my company where we're all rowing the boat in the same direction.
Okay, no, that's a very good description, and yes, I think you are right. That evolution of saying that you can't do everything, I wish that would trickle down to entry level and mid level as well,
Oh
because
boy,
we have
yes.
a lot of audience members who are frustrated by the process, right? Like we want you to be entry level, but we also want you to have a CISSP and 10 years of experience, right? Like these things just don't jive. They don't make sense. So it's good to see us. If it starts at the top, you think it will trickle down eventually. So there's hope is basically.
I do hope so. Although you missed on that job description, for you also need a Purple Heart and 30 years of Kali Linux. I saw that on a job description for an
Yeah,
internship paying $15 an hour. And I'm like, okay, so HR has over rotated into risk management here, which
right.
based on my own experience with getting into cybersecurity to your other question, let's see, I am a theater major dropout. That is the best way to describe it. I tell my kids quite regularly the only reason that I am where I am today is I dropped out of college after one semester of theater, realizing that there was absolutely no way that I was going to be able to pay my rent. That there was just like the odds of me getting to Broadway and doing musical theater, which was my thing, were approximately zero, or perhaps less than zero. There was just no real path forward for me. And so I took a lot of what I learned about improv and improv my way into a consulting gig at a startup. I was employee number 4 and just read everything that I could read, knowing full well, first of all, the president of the company, the founder, was fantastically cheap, and we did government contracting, which is just the perfect combination. And so he was willing to take a chance on me as somebody with no prior background in security or necessarily in computers, who had the aptitude, the willingness to learn, but also the recognition that I could accept a lower amount of pay than what the market rate was. And I think that if I look on now from the years since, where I've worked across various industries, that motion is unfortunately changing. Like you said, there's a lot of these
Right.
entry-level positions that have overly onerous requirements that by no means would I have met. And I feel fortunate for what I've accomplished as a result. I won't say it's been easy at all the time of having to learn literally everything. Like I remember one point I realized software engineering was a discipline. Apparently it's a thing they teach in school, and I just, I missed that whole bit. Read everything that I could on it just so I could bring myself up to speed for conversations. But unfortunately, today, the emphasis we have is less about aptitude and less about intent and more about prior work and more about certifications.
Right.
And I think that really it makes it harder for people to get into jobs that are functionally speaking, like if you get a cybersecurity job, entry level, it is a middle class paying job. It just straight out of the gate, you can go for 2 years. Actually, one of my kids is going for 2 years. They really got good at working around the parental controls that I'd tried to deploy on their devices, and that
Unnatural.
didn't work. And they realized, oh, this is fun. I might be able to do offensive penetration testing and work around these security controls. And like, oh, this is going to be interesting. So, they're taking a 2-year degree, knowing full well that that is a path to prosperity. But at the same time, they've got that ability, they've got that background, they've got a parent who was engaged and involved in
Right.
cybersecurity, who didn't necessarily like come down on them too hard for jailbreaking their own devices and rooting their own devices at times. But I don't see that as being part of the conversation anymore. And I think the over reliance on certifications, like there's an economic cost associated with test
Right.
prep and with taking, I don't know, even a boot camp and then actually taking the certification. And that's really limiting the type of individuals who can come into cybersecurity, where you already have to have a certain amount of capital just to get in the door, whether it's for certification or for college education, or goodness help us both. And I think that that's really limited our effectiveness as an industry.
Right. No, absolutely. So I like to touch on two things. So the thing number one, that is amazing background. And it makes sense now. Like, so I've watched the podcast, and you do emote, and you do have the ability to pivot very quickly. So like now that makes sense. I'm like, okay, like I can put the two together, and that goes along the lines of aptitude, right? Like I've talked to people who have crossed over, who were in law or medical, or they're flight uh, stewards or attendants,
Mm-hmm.
things of that nature. And they took principles from their jobs, and they were able to apply it over here in cyber and IT, and do phenomenal things, right? Run circles around people who are just book smart people in the industry, right? And that is a shame that that's kind of gone away. Like not, and I am optimistic, right? Like a lot of these people I met during the pandemic. So there was this big
Mhm.
shift where like the planes aren't flying, the people aren't eating out, they're not dining and things of that nature. So I need to pivot into something. And these very smart people, were able to pick up the skills necessary to find those jobs pretty quickly. And the market was open at the time.
Mhm.
But since the pandemic's now over, things are starting to shift and adjust, and it's not necessarily always in the best way. So I do agree with you, and hopefully more people can have your background and your story, because that's amazing, right? That you're able to take those talents and bring them over here and do amazing things with it.
I mean, I'm hopeful mostly because of the veterans programs that I've had the privilege of working with and supporting over the years. Like one of the candidate pools that I have regularly drawn from when I've been hiring for cybersecurity roles is people who are veterans, because you do not have to explain fundamentals to them, like what is the mission, why is security important, why are we doing this, and combine that with a strong work ethic and a desire to learn. A lot of the stuff that the various community organizations and industry organizations are putting towards veterans communities to help veterans transition into cybersecurity roles. I'm hopeful for that because, first of all, it's a great population that's very skilled, very motivated, very smart, talented, picks up stuff quick. I think we need to kind of as a part of a national conversation is figure out how do we expand that to include other industries from people who don't necessarily who aren't veterans but still want to get into the industry.
Right.
Where is their pathway these days? And like myself, liberal arts, I have hired a lot of good liberal arts people too, myself having that background, or having had a try at that background. One of my favorite malware researchers I've ever hired was a concert violinist, right? Like she
Okay.
just had absolutely no background in the technologies, and yet when she picked it up, her way of picking apart problems was very different than anybody else.
Right. The
And
diversity of thought. Like
exactly.
that's
And
a
that an aptitude and that ability to think at something differently. And I think that's something that we miss in a lot of our conversations around why we're hiring for a role is like, what do you need to be able to do? Like, if you're going to do malware research, you have to really like puzzles, right? If you're going to be in the governance side of things, you have to really like cutting through bureaucracy and succinct words, right? If you want to be in the risk management perspective, you want to have somebody who's good at talking about uncomfortable things, because ain't nobody likes to talk about risk regularly. So it's these omissions that we have where there are very talented individuals out there that could probably do that and do well at it, but we're saying, well, you need to have a CISSP. And you also need to have, your offensive penetration tester certification and so on. It's not helping.
right. And I agree. And to flip it to optimistic, right? I think you brought up a good point where you're able to hire people because you understand the background, how it could be applied. And I think we can get there. I think it's just a lot of the ATS system is not the greatest, right? It's discriminating against people just based upon whatever's been fed to it, as opposed to having a conversation with people. And once you have that conversation, things start to solidify. So I think there's some hope there, and what we typically say, it's not necessarily what you know, but it's about who you know, right? Making those connections through various organizations, like you said, like when it comes to veterans, you have 4Block and Hire Our Heroes, and
Mhm.
a list of I'm probably forgetting some people, right? I should be talking about. So I'm sorry.
That's
um,
all right. There's so many good organizations out
there are
there
a
that,
ton of them. Yes.
like the thing is, connect with your local DEVR, Veterans Employment Representative. And, if you're a veteran listening to the show right now, you should absolutely connect with your local Veterans Association or community association and find out like
Absolutely.
what opportunities are there. Because a lot of that tends to be free for veterans to be able to take upskilling training. And like I've seen programs out of Colorado where it's 12-week program with guaranteed like employment at the end. That's fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. You have now you jog my memory. You have O2O, you have Fed VTE. Like there's a lot of training. If you're thinking about separation or retirement or what have you. and you want to, like you said, upskill or pivot, there's a ton of opportunity. And they keep claiming that we have this million vacancies out there, right? So
Right. Yeah,
I
and a
think,
lot of that is self-inflicted, I think. But I will say on applicant tracking systems, I am hopeful based on New York's local laws that they're put in this summer, actually, around use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in applicant tracking systems. Because something we found, if you look at the growth of generative AI and AI in general, just rabbit hole for a second here, we know we can audit our code for security vulnerabilities manually or automatically. We know that we can audit for privacy violations and compliance violations. Something that we can't audit for is for ethical violations or for discriminatory outcomes in the code. And so what New York State has said is, look, if you want to use an ATS that has some kind of machine learning, artificial intelligence, that's fine. Be prepared to publish findings on the level of discrimination and bias that is using, and make that publicly available and do it annually. And I think that's fantastic, because done well, if you've got resume blinding in place, if you have good guardrails in place that strip out all of the background information that protected classes should absolutely not be ranked against, and yet unfortunately tend to get ranked against, right? If you strip all of that out, an ATS can do really great things. But in most cases, as you've said, it does not. It tends to perpetuate existing divisions. And I think that as we move into this world where AI is going to be doing more things, some of them good, some of them not, we really do have to look at the ethical consequences of that, so that it doesn't become another way of perpetuating racial divides.
no, absolutely. And that's interesting, because I didn't know that was going through New York at this time, because like the EU is already pushing pretty far ahead when it comes to their policy and what have you. So like as this continuously evolves, I'm becoming more optimistic and less Skynet, right? Like, because initially you're like, this is not going to be good. This is going to
Right.
perpetuate, our worst. But it seems as though, people who are smarter than me, and elected officials and things of that nature, are actually thinking about these things and trying to do something before, uh, the bad could happen, right? Like, let's figure out a way to make it as equitable as possible. So I am excited about that. And it can be kind of like, I'm going off on a tangent. All these states with their own policies can be kind of interesting, challenging when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
writing policy, to being a CISO, a VCISO, or anything in between. But I'm kind of liking what's happening. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like when it comes to like Texas has their own Texas ramp and what have you. Now you inform me about New York. I have to look into that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as long as they can start to bridge these gaps, like, I don't need 50 policies, but if certain states can lead the effort, and then the other states can join in, such as lawmakers typically do, right? The
Mm-hmm.
representative from Vermont and the representative from New York could co-chair something. I'm kind of cool with that.
Yeah, yeah, and ultimately that would make it easier for businesses to comply with our various, like our patchwork of privacy and cybersecurity regulations. Where I tend to get more excited is the work on recognizing that if you do some form of reasonable cybersecurity, and I know that reasonable controls has been bandied about as a term before, but
Right.
it makes it easier if you're a security professional recommending, hey, we should, like, instead of doing the thing that Joe says we should do, why don't we follow the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? And in some states, I think it's four now: Utah, Connecticut, Ohio, and Iowa, I think it is, you get an affirmative tort defense if you're doing literally any like published cybersecurity framework as a business, and being able to say, wait a second, we get to throw out lawsuits, tort lawsuits, if we can prove at a policy level and a procedure level we're doing normal stuff. I think that's the recognition on the part of lawmakers that it, like, cybersecurity ultimately, when it comes to risk management, is like tornadoes. right? Or like hurricanes. Like you can do everything you can possibly do. You're in Florida, they have
Right. It was
hurricanes there,
great.
right? You can, you can
Great
shore up
segue.
your house, you can put up sandbags to prevent flooding, you can do all the right things, and still hurricanes are going to happen. And I think in the same way in cybersecurity, we can patch our systems, we can have policies, we can educate our staff, we can have all the technical and and procedural controls in place, and still bad things will happen. And I think the recognition now is on lawmakers and regulators. If you made a reasonable effort, you should not necessarily be punished for
Right.
it. I think where we're seeing, unfortunately, the other side of that regulation is that sustained failures in the market have driven certain prescriptive directives, such as the SEC's most recent guidance for public companies, where they definitely want folks to business a specific way, and nobody likes being told what to do. But if we'd been doing that for 20 years now, we probably wouldn't be having these conversations about what are reasonable cybersecurity controls and should the board have oversight.
No, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought the SEC rules as well, because that's again a hot topic, and things are ever evolving. But I do like my co-host Shannon says, he's the patriot guy, right? He's like, I get them trading in certain freedoms for other things and things of that nature. But and this is a rabbit hole, right? I don't necessarily want to get too political, but sometimes you have to turn the screws in order to drive these companies into making smarter decisions. I guess I would say, because at the end of the day, like the risk belongs to them, and that's just how business works. But coming from the DoD side, right? Like I see there's a huge divide. Like there's actual freedom out here, because there's certain things where a business can make decisions uh, for budgetary reasons that in the DoD
Mm-hmm.
space that would be your network would be shut down, right? And there's certain freedom in that, and I get that, and I do like it. However, there's certain, like, sometimes regulation does have to step in to at least put up some guardrails to protect people, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity defense of a private company is national defense. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just, it all rolls up into protecting the citizenship, at least in my
Yeah,
opinion.
and I think that's one of those selling points, again, going back to diversity in hiring and diversity in thought. We don't lean into that message enough collectively as an industry. Like, we're people who want to protect our families and our friends and our companies that we work at and our customers' data. And we want to do the right things so the wrong things do not happen. I think a lot of that tonality gets, unfortunately, removed from the communication of how we outwardly present cybersecurity as an industry. And I think that that's a failure of imagination more than anything else. If we talk about the social benefits of working in our industry, I think we advance the conversation far more than talking about, hey, look, we've got another 0 day and there was another breach and blah, 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 blah. It just feels like the same old news. We need a different approach.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think, like, so again, like I like the way that you guys do your podcast. I definitely want to get more into the company, because I don't think we even said the name of your company, to be honest with you. So
Oh,
we definitely,
Hyperproof? Yeah,
there you
I think I
go.
mentioned it at the top. Field CISO of Hyperproof.
Okay, and kind of what you do, what you guys are doing, your initiatives, and again, talk about your tools and things of that nature. Because again, this is not a marketing deal. It's not veiled advertising, so to speak. Like I'm an actual fan of what you guys are doing, and how you're kind of bringing not only the tools to the fight, but also the message, right? The messaging also goes with it. So definitely go ahead and kind of explain like whatever initiatives you guys have going on, or anything that you want to get into as well.
Sure, sure. So Hyperproof, you might have heard of us from our recent Series B raise. We are a compliance automation software, so the GRC space. I tend to focus primarily on the risk management element. That's the whole cybersecurity CISO background there. Makes me think primarily in terms of risk, funny that. And, we've got really good employee initiatives associated with better hiring and also retention of our staff. That's actually one of our measurable, I'm not in HR, but I work with the HR professionals. Like, one of our measurement goals is people have to feel like they're growing at Hyperproof to actually stay there. And I think that's a recognition that people need to grow in their career, but also at the same time, we have to be inclusive towards encouraging people from non-traditional backgrounds to apply to our jobs, preferably if they have cats, though we do accept dogs. A lot of us are cat people, it turns out. And that comes through in a lot of our messaging as well, around job postings that we have, where we are a fully remote organization that has a fairly strong commitment to diversity. And that comes through in, like, as you said, in a lot of the things that you've seen, but also on the back end. We're just now completing our DEI training. And even though we do have business in California, like we went, okay, well, the California standard that's a good, that's a good footing to start with, but let's go a little bit further and let's talk about like all the elements associated with DEI rather than just those that are mandated or that we have to do in order to be compliant. And I think that's a great commitment to show as a business that, we care about our employees, and we also want to ensure that everyone feels like they've got a part of the conversation, regardless of their background and regardless of where they're from. They're here now. We're all working on something awesome.
No, that's
And
great. No, no,
just
go ahead.
the reason that I came to Hyperproof, just kind of to explain, but what we do. Prior to joining Hyperproof, I was doing executive advisory work for Fortune 500, Global 1,000 businesses, where companies would pay us six figures. So, figure 250,000 and up was not an untoward number, where I'd actually look at it and we'd do a cybersecurity maturity assessment of that organization based on their deployed controls, based on which frameworks they were following, their regulatory burden. I worked with a great guy, former Air Force, used to blow up stuff, and then he got into cybersecurity. And yeah, exactly, right. Derek was a cool guy, and he'd do open source intelligence on these companies. And in the course of doing that, we'd ask, like, show us, like, here's a DRL, a document request list or an evidence request list. I would send it to the client and say, send us your policies, your procedures, and we'll evaluate them. The client would inevitably panic because the auditor or the assessor is coming. They'd ask, what are these things? They'd send it back to us. I then have to have associate consultants who I trained, like, here's how you read a policy document. Here's how you inspect a procedure document for evidence of effectiveness. And in 6 short weeks, we could give them a view of how mature their business was 6 weeks ago for $250,000. There's no way that scales. That's just crazy town right there. That's like, it puts an untoward burden on businesses. And so when my buddy Matt at Hyperproof said, hey, we're working on solving that, I said, let's do that, because that's great. So what we're focused on is the ability for businesses to continuously collect evidence of compliance without, like, the classic audit team asks the security team, hey, can you send me a screenshot of a PDF of a spreadsheet, please, so that I can, like, look at it for a green checkbox or a red X. Like, nobody wants to do that. And it's a computer needs to copy a file to another computer. Why don't we automate that? Why don't we take all that, like, checklist-oriented work that drives so many of us in security and compliance to, like, it's the part of the job that none of us like, that we all have to do? Why don't we remove that? Why don't we make that something that's automatable, predictable? You can actually focus your time on things that require intuition and creativity and thought processes, as opposed to treating people like machines. And then let's make sure that we can tie that back to risks, so we can understand, here's how effectively a company is managing their risk portfolio based on the controls that we're now looking at live, because we don't have, people involved in that bit of like, let's copy a file and check and see, hey, is it working? Let's do that live, and then make business level decisions where you can actually find either cost savings or reallocate staff time to something more productive to defend the business, or maybe a take on a different regulatory framework. So that's kind of the why I joined Hyperproof, but it also speaks a lot about what we do. Like, I look at what the best thing I get to do all day is make people happy who don't necessarily have a history of working well together. The compliance team and the security team traditionally don't like, that's not a great, it's a contentious relationship. And so in our success stories that I love to work with, right, and love to talk about, that relationship becomes productive. Because we get into security. If you're in security, you do not get into security to deal with the compliance people. And if you get into compliance, you didn't get into compliance to become a project manager to go chase security people. So if you can remove that barrier, again, it makes it a more productive working relationship, a lot more healthy, and we can focus on things that bring us joy in our day, whether it's doing incident response or malware analysis or policy work.
No, absolutely. And what kind of blew my mind about it. So I'm used to working with spreadsheets and really rooted like so again. And so Aaron Williams is sitting there with, I think it's called I don't want to drop any software, but Stick Viewer. I think it's
Oh,
different
stick
stuff.
viewer.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Gosh, yeah, geez. Oh,
very it's very rigid. I'm not trying to knock people who developed it, none of that, right? Like that's why I
yeah.
didn't want to kind of say the name, but when you say it, it makes people grimace. You're like, oh,
Yep.
it's very hard to work with, right? But so Aaron Williams is going through spreadsheets, right? Like he's part of the network team, so he doesn't really want to deal with the assessors when they show up, and then the assessors show up, and things have evolved both in the military and outside. Where a decade ago, assessors came in, broke your stuff, told you were wrong, walked out the door, right? They had no
Yep.
skin in the game. That's what assessors did, right? So after doing that for half of my life and then going and moving over to the QA side, the inspector general side, things of that nature in the Department of Defense. And now, I do NIST CSFs and things of that nature in the private sector. It's a kind of friendlier environment now. So like having this ability to have an interface that allows the two to interact with each other an easier, friendlier manner just softens the blow even more, right? Because I'm not coming in there to come into your business and break your stuff. I'm your assessor. Then I turn potentially, into your V-System, things of that nature, and I can
Mm-hmm.
guide you, right? I have skin in the game. I found the thing that's broken, and now I can help you fix the thing as our relationship continues to evolve. And that's what I like about the software, especially about my company, right? As well, is that approach, and the military is going that route as well, right? Like when I came into QA is when the switch kind of flipped back in I'm going to date myself. I'd say 2010-ish
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That sounds
time
about right.
frame is when the military was starting to, because I came in 03, right? So Aaron Williams was getting beat up by assessors. And then when I became an assessor, that's when they decided to flip the switch. They're like, well, no, we can't just go in there and break their stuff. Get their commander fired, right? We have
Right.
to come in here and try to help them evolve. And it's good to see that the same is happening out here in the outside world. And companies like your own are making it also just friendlier and easier to do it, right? So even to the extent where I could even say it's kind of gamified. It makes it kind of fun to
Mm-hmm.
to get your policy or whatever that artifact or proof or evidence is to make the thing turn green and then make the wheel spins and things of that nature, right? Like it gives you endorphins
It
as opposed
does,
to
and
just
also oh, exactly. And the thing is, like, the reason we have these frameworks, these laws, these regulations is because of risks. And I think the biggest thing that companies that are using Hyperproof are able to do right now is to look at emerging risks. Because what I was describing from like when I was doing executive advisory work, I could tell you your risk profile 6 weeks ago, right? I've met companies that do a risk assessment on an annualized basis. In today's business landscape, and I'm going to step back and not say cybersecurity landscape here, but in today's business landscape, there are a lot of risks out there. A lot of them are very known risks like international expansion or competition or supply chain disruption, some of which cyber is a factor on. But if you can categorically list those risks, define them, get everybody on the board and C-level and executives to agree on these are the risks we're talking about, folks. This is how we feel about them. Here are maybe some numbers associated with them, but then automatically collect data over how effectively you're managing those risks. That means when a new risk comes up, you can more easily ingest it and make an informed decision rather than going, oh, well, geez, we can't talk about this for 6 months, because I don't think that's an acceptable position for a company to take anymore, is to say, we can't talk about today's risks. We're still talking about the risks from last year. I don't
yeah.
think that that's a way to manage a business effectively.
No, and I like that the insight there as well, because it shows that the CISO or whomever, whatever they want to call that position, has a direct impact on business performance, right? And that's I think something we don't talk about enough. because you have other positions. Like I've heard of BSO and things of that nature where they're trying to bridge the gap. But at the end of the day, I think there's that evolution where you're starting to see more of the techie people. In your case, like I like how your company breaks it down into the three different types of CISO that make the one, greater than the sum of its parts. I think that's the future going forward because uh, you have an MBA or you have whatever experience in Fortune 500s and things of that nature, like that, you're not necessarily the techie person in the room, but you need to know how that's going to impact the bottom line. And that
Mhm.
gap needs to be bridged. So it's good to see that this even helps in that regard as well, right? Because you're giving them the ability to see it in real time. So
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the other part on the cybersecurity narrative we need to collectively pivot is the narrative that it is a black hole into which money and effort and goodwill go into, and the only thing that ever comes out are data breaches. I think that that has been our historic approach of like, this is what cybersecurity is. You try not to have a bad day. I think that the smart CISOs these days are partnering with the go-to-market team. They're partnering with the HR team. They're partnering with the governance committee, and they're saying this is actually a competitive advantage. If you are selling business to business right now, if you're in the SaaS space selling B2B, and you can say, I have a good cybersecurity stance, maybe you've got some attestations like a SOC 2 Type 2, maybe you got an ISO 27001, something like that, right? You can skip past a lot of the security questionnaires that your competitors are going to be filling out. And that becomes suddenly a accelerator to closing deals rather than dealing with 1,200 question SIGs, standard information gathering questionnaires, which no
right.
CISO really likes to deal with. And the sales team, they don't want to deal with that either. I think that becomes it's missing from our conversation around cybersecurity. This actually not only helps defend your customers' data, but also it makes business easier because as we all look at our supply chains, we're all asking ourselves, well, who's the risk in my supply chain now? And who can I effectively trust? And so by having that ability to effectively communicate, here's how well we're doing the cybers right now, like it becomes a competitive strategic advantage, which I think is necessary.
No, absolutely. So this is a great conversation because I think it spans the gamut, right? Like we're talking to people who are trying to break into cyber, kind of understand it, ways they can pathways to potentially getting there, and that you can come from a diverse background or have diversity of thought, and make some really big waves within the industry. But also talking to people who are currently in the industry and then different tools and things that they can look at. But most importantly, uh, it's the talking to the people who are at the top, right? The people who can give the hand up. Like you can bring these people in who have the diversity of thought, diversity of culture, things of that nature, who can give you a different opinion or viewpoint. Like you said, you have accomplished violinist who is now doing great work in cyber, um, and these people can be a great asset and help you with the bottom line. Because at the end of the day, it's about like from their perspective, it's going to be those shareholders, it's going to be the bottom line, because that's their job, right? That's the function they provide to the business, and we provide, at least in my case, I'm the person who's feeding you the information to make sure that you're protecting your clientele, staying safe, right? So that way you're not
Mhm.
going to get beat up by the government or breach one of your frameworks and then you lose money. So I think it's a very concise conversation. I don't think it's always broken up a lot, to sometimes the detriment to the audience. So that I can greatly appreciate that. So I'm going to make a hard pivot.
All right.
So outside of all the great work that you were doing with you and your company, what are you doing to relax? Because next week, so just behind the scenes, we're going through articles now, right? I do the run a show usually on a Friday or a Saturday, but
Mhm.
there's been so many articles the past couple of days about mental health and cybersecurity. Like from the CISO down, people are just either they're overworked, they're overstressed, they're just not getting enough sunshine, right? And just as part of the job can sometimes be long hours. And like you said, sometimes you're checking boxes, you think doing things that are uncomfortable or displeasing
Right.
on a daily basis, right? So what are you doing to protect your mental health? Like what do you do to unwind, things of that nature outside of work?
Let's see. So I'm first of all a fan of regular exercise, even if I don't necessarily want to do it, or even if my watch tells me occasionally, like, you didn't sleep well enough, maybe you should take it easy today. I do get up and make sure that I get in my exercise, 40 hardcore minutes every day. I've got during the pandemic, I found a VR kickboxing app
Okay.
just this pair of Australians, and they're fantastic, the coaches, and that works for me. So 20 minutes of just sweating. I'm sure that if I had the windows to my living room open, I probably look absurd, but that's not the point. And then Bellingham is blessed with a lot of outdoor activities we can do when it's not raining here or when it is raining here. So in our secret 6 weeks of summer, I tend to be a fan of going out and going paddleboarding. I'll go out for 8,
Okay.
10, 12 miles on the lake, take a picnic, take coffee with me. It's fantastic. In the winter, I've been snowboarding for over 30 years now. I did try skiing twice actually. It didn't work out. So I'm very much into those things. And then when I'm not out doing athletic stuff, let's see, some reason I am one of the founders of Bellingham's local board gaming Discord server,
Okay.
and we regularly run board games. So I'll have, I actually have 2 board game campaigns that I run right now, or I'm on, and I'll usually have like 20 or 30 people over on a Friday. Fixed punch. We'll play board games for till midnight, 1 a.m. and the next day go, oh, that was fun. Yeah, my watch is telling me I didn't sleep well enough, but I find that that's like building something for other people to enjoy and to experience play. And myself, I tend to like math heavy board games, but not everybody does. So I try to have accessible board games. And then other than that, pinball. That's my other thing. A big fan of old school pinball.
Okay. Like so the actual like analog, like I put my hand
Oh
on
yeah,
simple. Okay.
yeah. We are blessed with so sometimes for a date night, my boyfriend and I actually will go to the Racket, which has 16 tables, I think, in a bar. And if the kids are in town, we'll take them to the Ruckus Room, which has got old school arcade games like Street Fighter 2 and whatnot, as well as maybe a
Wow.
dozen
Okay.
pinball tables. So I enjoy it. I find that I was in Las Vegas actually for Black Hat, and my favorite thing that I went to at Black Hat, other than a couple meetings that I had, was I went to the Pinball Hall of Fame, which I absolutely love because it's just like all the old pinball machines that I remember growing up.
That's awesome because I don't see that a lot anymore. Like I know like you said you're at Black Hat. So I know Vegas has a bunch of like arcade like restaurants and bar themed places that have old school cabinets and things of that nature. But I haven't seen one here in Tampa yet. I'm sure it exists. I'm sure there's like someone like there's the one person from Tampa who's listening who'll be like, yeah, it's so and so's. Like,
Drop it in
please
the
put that in the
comments.
comments. Yeah, please
Yeah,
drop that
yeah.
in the comments so I can go there. But yeah, so like you're in the state of Washington, so I know you guys like so I've passed through there a few. I was stationed in Alaska, so I used to fly through all the time, right? Uh, but I actually was able to stop between I was because I lived in Idaho. I was stationed in
Hmm.
Idaho, Mountain Home Air Force Base, and then we're stationed at Elmendorf, so in Anchorage. But when I was prior to moving there, um, we decided to ship the vehicle, right? We didn't want to drive like we should have did it. We should have drove the Yukon and saw the beautiful
Yeah,
scenery.
yeah.
But instead, I was like, it's gonna be a long trip. The kids are young. Let's just ship it and fly there. So every time I flew through Seattle, pouring rain, right? The one time I
Yep.
dropped off my vehicle, I dropped it off in SeaTac. I was the port was in Seattle, but my hotel was in Tacoma, and I didn't know that. I didn't know any better. So so I had to make that I had to
Bit of
bridge
a
that
drive.
gap.
Yeah.
But no rain. It was beautiful. It was like the scene from Grey's Anatomy. I don't know if you ever watched the Grey's Anatomy
Hmm. Hmm.
where they showed Seattle and it's not raining. You're like, that doesn't exist. Like every time I go through there, it's raining. But it was just like that. I went to I think it's called Pikes Peak, where they throw the fish.
A Pike Place Market.
But yes, Pike Place Market, or they throw the fish and stuff like that. I saw the first I think it was the original Starbucks. At least is what they
Hmm.
told me. Which looks nothing like Starbucks now. It was really crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
But I can see them have an arcade scene there. And oh, and I've been to Yakima as well. I don't know if you're Ever been to
Oh,
Yakima,
yep, been to
Australia?
Yakima. Was there through there last summer, actually, on the way to a group of wineries down in Walla Walla. I guess that's the other thing that I do is a couple friends and I, we do regional wine tours once a year,
Oh, awesome.
sometimes
Okay.
twice a year. So this year we went up to Canada, up near Kelowna, and hit a bunch of wineries, a couple distilleries. It's
Okay.
agritourism, I guess, is what we're supposed to call it. But to us, it's like, oh, good, we get to go drink wine for a week, or for a weekend, or for 4 days. Like it's just a fantastic thing to do and support local businesses, see a part of the region we wouldn't know normally get to, whether it's in BC or Oregon or Washington State. We might go a little further afield, I think.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. Speaking of drinking, I joke to people. I tell them I put the yak in Yakima. So I got very sick in Yakima. I had a really bad night. But what I didn't know, like until I got there, I was like, all these camper shows I see all the time, or the things on top of people's cars that say Yakima from Yakima, Washington. I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I bad night. It's one of those stories that the people who were there, they remind me. Remember that time with the Yakima? It was for a Sec Plus Net Plus boot camp.
Oh,
It was
wow.
when the DoD was figuring out 8570 and the requirements to having your tier one, tier two. So they didn't
Right.
know what we needed. So they were like, just go down there, attend the boot camp, get your Sec Plus, your Net Plus. And I was good every night except for that one night.
Yeah, those do happen in our industry. Just briefly, all I can say is I was at a sales kickoff for a startup I was at some years ago in San Jose, and I walked into a bar, and this sounds like the setup for a joke. And it was a former Russian FSB officer, a
Oh,
former
okay.
Navy SEAL, and me walk into a bar, and they have to prove to themselves how much they can drink. And the former Navy SEAL points at the upper left side of the bar shelves and says, "We're going to work our way across." That's also where I learned cultural differences, where if you are the person who stops drinking before somebody who's Russian, like classically, you're not going to be their friend. They're going to be insulted by that. On a
Oh,
positive
really?
note, I was not painting the sidewalk at 3 a.m. like he was, which that was just something I learned not to do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, like yes, in the industry you do have those stories. That was younger me. That was Airman Williams me. Like 40-year-old me. That's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
I would have been put down way earlier in the night than that. But no, so next time I'm up there, I definitely have to hit you up and let you know I'm there in the
Oh,
area. But
definitely.
I definitely want to see because I don't get enough of that, right? Like being a kid from the 80s, you don't see a lot of arcades any longer. You don't see a lot of pinball. I guess halls would be what you call it, or like
A pinball room or a pinball
mhm,
bar.
gotcha.
I mean,
You just
I
don't
remember
they
though
don't
the
exist.
arcades, like the arcades were somewhere I could lurk outside of in the hopes of not getting a broken nose for having gone in, which is to say that perhaps I was not in the best of, yeah. My childhood was just a mess ultimately, but now
Gotcha.
I can go to the arcade, I can spend 50 cents, I can play pinball. It's awesome. Plus you can get a drink, and they've got fairly good music too. So absolutely love going there. Probably now that I'm talking about it, I'm going to have to go there this week.
No, that's awesome. And then of course you're not a beer drinker, but you're cultured because of the show.
I do like wine, and I am learning beer. We'll see. My friend from he's in aerospace actually. There are 2 cans left in my fridge that are up for drafting compliance, and he gave me a 4 pack, sent another 4 to Tom, and said I was going to hate one of the 4 of them. We've just done 2 of them so far. I haven't hated them, although I will say raspberry is like not my favorite beer flavor.
Right. Yeah, that has
But
to be the
see,
required
I'm
taste.
still waiting to see which is going to be the one that I absolutely hate. So watch drafting compliance in the next month, and we will hopefully find out which one I hate.
Right. Right. Yeah, we'll definitely get there. But yeah, so and I do like wine as well. Like I picked it up in Sicily. I was stationed in Sicily for a while.
Oh,
Uh
beautiful area.
yeah, like not only is it the tours and all the touristy stuff, it's super cheap. But I learned
Mhm.
that because I like bitter, right? So like bitter beer or bitter wine, Etna, right? So you're right there on the
Mhm.
volcanic what do you say, surface? Like the whole town is on a slant. But they get their grapes from the volcano And then every family has their own variant, right? So you stop by a store, you go to a restaurant, like they all have their own wine. So it grew on me pretty quick, but they don't use preservatives, obviously. So it gives you the excuse, like I have to drink this. Like I can't put it in the fridge. It's gonna go bad in a couple of days. I have to finish this. So,
Yes, Italy definitely ruined my expectations for wine. I've just only recently come around to, oh, there's other wines in the world. That's neat.
right, right. But no, this has been a fascinating conversation, right? Even though I did have some samples of your work, right, because I do watch your podcast, and we'll definitely make sure we put all the links in your bio and description, all that good stuff within this episode. And as I share it primarily on LinkedIn, we'll make sure to capture all your information. But I did not know the background, so that's awesome, and it just goes to show that there's definitely a need for the diversity of thought and culture and things of that nature when it comes to cybersecurity, because you never know what you'll be able to pull from somebody, right? What they bring to the table, what they can bring into our field, as well as just having a different perspective. Like just that in itself helps out tremendously. Because like if everybody's the same in the room, right? Like you're not ever gonna to evolve. And that's kind of where cybersecurity has been for a while now, and is starting to move into what I believe to be a more diverse and more friendly environment, right? Coming from being an IT guy and engineering, like IT people kind of rough. Engineers
Yeah.
rougher. Cybersecurity has always been a little bit friendlier, at least from my perspective, right? So I think this community is growing. It's getting even better. So I definitely want everybody to tune in to you and your stuff and all your initiatives. So we're going to post all of that good stuff. I definitely want to have you back on the show. And with your schedule, I know you're a pretty busy person, but whenever you have the free time, please let me know. My calendar is always open. Because I think it's just a really good conversation. Like it is called Ask A CISSP, and I like to get as many different opinions and information out there as possible to people who are trying to obtain that. And hopefully they're trying to grow into it and not just trying to capture the CISSP because the entry level job is asking for it. Right?
Yeah, no,
This is
that
something you
is a
grow
difficult
into.
piece of paper to get
Yeah,
on your wall.
you grow
That is
into
not
that.
easy.
Yeah. It's not only about studying for the test; it's about having the experience and being within the field. So, but no, thank you for being on the show again. It's great for you to share your time. And if you have any parting words before we go.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for having me on the time on the show, Ryan. Really do appreciate it. And drafting compliance, if you like FedRAMP or you want to know more about that, if you're interested in my hot take on the news, that's top 5 in 5. And we're doing a new live stream too. So if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, Hyperproof has a new live stream called InfoSec Pros, where I am interviewing people who are CISOs, people who are information security, cybersecurity practitioners. So if you're interested in being on that, I'm trying to fill up my show calendar for the next 6 months. So drop me a note. We just had Joe Evangelisto on, a fantastic CISO, a friend of mine, and hopefully that will grow as well. But keep doing what you're doing, Ryan. We really do. I'm a fan of the show. So excited to be on, and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, everybody, please continue to tune in. I don't do enough of the like, share, subscribe. I always forget. But definitely like, share, subscribe, hit a bell. There's a bell associated. We're trying to grow our YouTube channel, so please share with your nerdy friends so they can also jump on the bandwagon. I would like to double the current base. We have about 225 something like that, like 500 by the end of the year. So we're still trying to achieve that. But just continue to listen to the show. We greatly appreciate everybody, and leave your comments. So hit us up at all of the websites that go by our name. You can hit me up personally. I'm at RY Security Guy. That's RYRY Security Guy. I'm on LinkedIn, Clubhouse, Twitter, and Threads. And yes, I still call it Twitter. And where can they find you?
It will remain Twitter. I am Kayne McGladrey on LinkedIn. I am Kayne McGladrey on Twitter. And if you want to find out about the company, it's hyperproof.io or just Hyperproof on LinkedIn or Twitter.
There it is. Stay safe, stay secure.